All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 403 of the Restoring Rapport podcast. This is a podcast for young believers who are pursuing the goal of marriage and family and trying to get married as young as possible in a healthy way according to God's design. I'm your host, Seth Hensley. I come on twice a week, every week on Thursday and Sunday to discuss not only the benefits of getting married young, but I try to equip and encourage you in your pursuit of that goal. And today we're going to be reviewing a video on basically the differences between boys and girls and how they learn and how boys and girls should be raised differently. I'm going to give you my professional opinion as a public educator who's worked with thousands of students, and I'm going to talk about basically the differences between them and how you have to work differently with boys and girls, and just hopefully this will be super insightful for young parents who are moving into the season. My wife and I are really excited to be parents very, very soon, starting in May of 2026. So coming up pretty soon. We're looking forward to it a lot. And I'm just sort of kind of in the season of starting to formulate, how I'm going to raise my child. This is my first time, obviously. So I'm just thinking a lot about it. And I find out if I'm having a boy or a girl on November the 24th. This is being recorded on the 8th. And so at least, actually, I shouldn't say the 14th, or not 24th, 14th is when we have the actual test, but then we won't find out, it's got to be, once the test is done, then we have to wait a little bit for the results. So I'll be finding out soon though. And at that point, I'm going to start planning really specifically on, how to raise this baby, this child. And so this is just something that I've been thinking about a lot, and because boys and girls are very different. I mean, and I can just tell you that from personal experience, like working with them, they're very, very different and they need very, very different things. But we're going to react to a clip by Jeremy Pryor today on the Family Teams podcast entitled "Why You Must Raise Your Boys Differently." This is an Erica Komisar reaction. Let's see what he says.
The second one is Erica Komisar talking about how neurologically fragile little boys, I think she's primarily talking about boys that are, 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, how neurologically fragile they are at that young age compared to girls. So take a listen to this.
Boys are neurologically more fragile than girls. Boys don't survive as much because they are incredibly neurologically fragile. Emotionally fragile too. What that means is they're more prone to aggression, behavioral problems, ADHD-like behaviors, which is distractibility. They're more sensitive to stress from a very young age. They are not the same as girls. They don't learn the same way as girls. They need lots of physical expression during the day. If they don't get it and they're forced to sit in circle time, like little girls can sit in circle time, little boys go off the rails and then they're labeled as having attentional issues. And so we are educating little boys today like little girls, which is why they can't keep up. So if you ask me, we should separate little boys and little girls. In terms of the neurological fragility, they need that attachment figure even more than the little girls. When it comes to going to school, maybe we should separate little boys and little girls when they're little so we can cater to their individual needs. And it is different.
All right, so now this reel got almost 500,000 views. It's continuing to be shared a lot online. There are some interesting conversations that this erupted in the comment section, so I want to talk through a few of these. One is, my mother-in-law kept telling me that my son was going to become a mama's boy because I gave him so much attention as a baby and young child. But because of this, he had no problems leaving me to go to school and has become a wonderful man, husband, and father. This is from Calaby Hill. I love this perspective. Yes, we're talking about really young boys. This concern that they're going to be a mama's boy when they're really little and super fragile emotionally. I think that this is often just an imposition of the idea that men are wired a certain way, need a certain level of strength and invulnerability. I think there is some truth to that about men, but to impose those same ideas on really, really young boys who are 2, 3 years old and saying, okay, you need to man up, 2-year-old. This is just a misunderstanding of how development works with boys and girls. What Erica Komisar is pointing out is so valuable, and that is that it's not necessarily at all, she's not denigrating how fragile young girls are. Of course they are as well. But I think she's saying that if you had to compare them, and we were talking to some friends of ours who said that they had a daughter who was in the NICU, and the nurses said to her, look, you have to understand that if this was a boy, he would not have made it. And they were very familiar with a lot of the issues going on with very young infants, and that boys are more fragile at this young age. And so a lot of people in the medical profession, as well as, of course, developmental psychologists, have understood this dynamic for a long time. This is just not very well known.
And I will say that just in my professional opinion as an educator, I do have a lot more boys that seem emotionally fragile than girls. Now, I'm not saying that, I don't know, this gets really complicated as far as fixing this issue. Erica Komisar was suggesting basically dividing boys and girls into two different groups and instructing them separately as far as education goes. But again, I think that's an example of education trying to do something that the home does better. You don't have to create two institutions, one to teach boys and one to teach girls in the home. You just have to treat your boy and your girl differently because they are different. Like I really don't like cookie cutter instruction because kids are very, 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 very different. Now, they do have a lot in common. Yes, just like humans, one to another have a lot in common with one another, but they've also got a lot of differences. And so you're really doing them a disservice if you treat them all the same. And that's something that I think education tries to do and is, pushed harder for through differentiation practices in more recent years, but it can never do it to the extent that the home can, because you have two caregivers who know their children better than any teacher ever will. They spend more time with this person than any teacher ever will, particularly since we don't loop and have the same teacher with students from kindergarten to fifth grade and on, or it's just not how it's done, because teachers would have to learn to teach every content area all the way up through high school. Is just not practical. And again, you can't solve that by creating another program. You can't solve that by reforming the education system. You can't solve that by creating yet another government initiative. That's not going to fix the problem. How you solve this is you actually take responsibility and raise your own children. Okay, like, I don't know when it became normal to just basically pawn your children off to the government for 8 hours a day and expect them to sort of raise your children for you and teach them everything they need to be taught into their early adult years. That's not in any way conducive to cranking out, polished adults at 18 years old. That's how you create adults who do not have what they need and who never were in the environment to learn what they needed. And so it's just, I don't know, people throw around this phrase least restrictive environment in education a lot. And I mean, I'm just thinking, guys, like, the genuine least restrictive environment for a child is the home for learning. Okay. And the home really for everything. 5-year-olds, and if you ask me, 5-year-olds are not meant to be apart from their mother for 7.5 hours a day. Okay. And when you put them in school, a lot of the emotional fragility that Ms. Komisar is referencing is probably due in large part to the fact that we're removing kind of one of their only biological needs, and that is their mom at an early age. Okay. And so, yeah, you can expect a lot of separation anxiety. You can expect a lot of trauma. You can expect a lot of behavioral issues because we are kind of taking from children one of the only things that they need. Like, they don't need a lot when they're young. They need like food, water, shelter, a mom, and a dad. Okay, they need their parents. And we're kind of like removing one of those and creating a government substitute for it for like 7.5 hours a day, which is my job. And I'm not saying, like, I love working with kids and teaching them things, but I can't teach. It doesn't matter how good of a teacher I am. I can't teach, literally 650 students as effectively as their parents could teach two. Like, it just, the math is not mathing. It's just never going to work that way. And so, a lot of again, yes, boys are more emotionally fragile, but again, a lot of that emotional fragility that is being referenced by Erica Komisar might be due to the fact that she mentioned like 3-4 years old. If we are removing a boy's caregivers from him at 3 or 4 years old, we are removing one of the only fundamental needs that he has at that age. So you can expect there to be an emotional consequence on him. You can expect there to be physical consequences and behavioral consequences on him if we are removing one of the only things that he needs at that age. Again, we're sending kids to school too young. We're kind of absolving ourselves as our personal responsibility of parents to raise the children that we created. And it's all in the name of leaving it to the experts. But let me tell you something, guys, if you make a child, you are the expert. Like, you're going to spend more time with this person than anybody that is going to teach him or her in his or her entire life. Okay, teachers are just in there for, and I know this all too well. Teachers are just in a child's life for a temporary season in a close way. Like I had 11 students the year I taught kindergarten, and again, a lot of separation anxiety. Okay, in children at that age, because again, I think that, and I'm not saying, look, I know there are reasons parents send their children to school, but what I'm highlighting here is, if we're going to talk about emotional fragility, instead of blaming other things, let's blame the primary reason that children have emotional fragility at an early age, and it's we're removing their needs that they have. We're removing their need for, their mother and father as caregivers, and time with their mother and father as caregivers. And so you can expect there to be consequences of that. But the year I had kindergarten, I had 11 students. Okay, I got to know all of them fairly well. And I tried really hard to get to know all of them fairly well. They were all incredibly different, temperament-wise, personality-wise, interest-wise, very, very, very different. Okay. Now they did have a lot of things in common because they're all human beings. Okay, but there was a wide variance in the room. Okay, I got to know all of them as well as I possibly could in that time period, but it was only a school year. And as soon as that school year ended, they all moved on to have different full-time teachers. Okay, so I still try to foster my relationship with them and other students that I've had as much as possible. But if I'm only seeing them for a few minutes a week, which is what I get with them now, like my first kindergarten class, I only see them now for about 40 minutes every week. Okay, I don't have as much influence in their life anymore that I once had. Okay, so now it's not really, like, what's the word? It takes time. Like, here's how discipleship and raising children works. You just really need to put children in an environment with their parents and have them go about life together and interact with one another. Because when you do that, there are going to be problems that arise that you can then take the opportunity to teach your children how to see it. Like my mom always said, the world was our classroom growing up. We were homeschooled K through 12, and she literally taught us things at every possible opportunity that arose. Okay, and that's the natural way to do learning, I think. Okay, and then it also ensures that everything the children are learning is appropriate information that they're actually going to need to live a healthy life. Because a lot of things that we're teaching children now are not actually necessary for them to live a healthy life, and we're missing things that are necessary for them to live a healthy life, and we're not teaching them those things. But yeah, so if we're going to talk a couple points that I just want to, again, overemphasize, highlight for you, summarize for you. If we're going to talk about emotional fragility, let's talk about, particularly in boys, let's talk about the fact that we are removing their primary caregivers from them for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That is going to be the source of a lot of emotional problems that these young kids are experiencing. There's no getting around that, okay? Unless, again, during those formational years, you spend that time with them, which is, again, one of the great arguments I think that there are for homeschooling, like I was. And so, yeah, and that's only part of it. I know that boys are neurologically more emotionally fragile too. They, for example, when they, handling disappointment, they are really devastated, potentially probably more than girls are. And so, especially in those early years, there's a lot of tears, there's a lot of meltdowns, there's a lot of just heartbreak, 5-year-old heartbreak, resulting from the disappointments of the day that the kids experience. And they've got to learn how to handle that. But again, the question is how are we best able to teach them how to handle that? Through, a 40-minute interaction with a social and emotional teacher once a week, which is what I do. I basically I try to teach children emotional management in 40 minutes once a week. Like, it's very, very difficult. Like, and here's another reason it's difficult. I'm not in situations with them where they are angry, okay? The only times I see them are when they are taking a break from classwork and the difficult things of their life and coming to a classroom that is very fun, does not have grades, has a teacher that tries his best to be fun, me. I'm not really demanding anything difficult of them. They really don't have any reason to be angry outside of interactions with their peers that go south during the 40 minutes that they're in my room. And so I'm not around them during a lot of their emotional outburst moments. I'm not around them during a lot of the times where they actually need some boundaries enforced as far as emotional management and regulation in the real world. I'm not there. I just see them 40 minutes a week. And so it's very, very difficult. It's not an efficient way to teach children how to handle their emotions. Okay. If you want to do that again, and I'd say there's no better way to do that, is then by having children in close proximity with their primary caregivers during those early formational years, instead of pawning them off to a government institution to try and do what really you're capable of doing better than anyone. That's the problem. We've got to put parental responsibility back into the equation. And I'm not saying, again, that public school is bad or anything. I'm just saying you have to be responsible for teaching your children. You can't make somebody else responsible for it because they don't have as much influence in your child's life as you do, because you spend more time with them than anyone. And because those seasons where a teacher is around a child a lot are temporary and end when the student moves on to the next grade level. So yeah, I just think this is kind of a common sense principle. I know it's hard to implement solutions because we live in a world where things are expensive and parents have to work. Working involves being away from the home. Thanks to the exit from the home from, post-industrial revolution, men leaving the home to provide for their families, and, not early feminism, exit of the women from the home in order to provide for their families. But you still got to do it. Like you can't just absolve yourself of personal responsibility and let somebody else raise your kid.
By the population at large. Okay, another comment that I thought was interesting. But also, why don't we stop expecting young children to sit still? My 4-year-old girl cannot sit in circle time either. Yes, thank you. I agree 100%. Part of the problem is just the way we educate. We design the industrial education around what is most convenient for the teacher and not what is actually in the best interest of the students.
Here's what I will say too. Like he's talking about when he mentions things that are convenient for the teacher. As a public school teacher, I can talk this. Think about it for a second, guys. Why is self-control and being still so highly emphasized in public education? Why is that? Well, there are a couple of reasons. Number one, when you have children running around, there is more likely to be injury. Okay? When injury happens, we've made injury a bigger deal than it is, and so we have to have a responsible party. Who's the responsible party? A teacher. The teacher is going to be held accountable by the school and by the parents usually. And there's kind of a lot of pressure for us to keep children from getting hurt, but that is a natural part of life. So number one, there's this huge, we're trying to prevent injury because, again, it's injury outside the classroom is totally normal. We don't stop children from running while they're outside. We don't even stop them from running while they're inside. Have you ever thought about that for a minute? Don't run in the hallway. You hear that all the time at school. We never hear that at home. Don't run in the kitchen. Don't run in your bedroom. Don't run in the hallway. Don't run. It's both places are confined spaces. In one place, we're telling children not to run. In one place, we're not telling children not to run. What's the difference? The difference is we've crammed literally 650 small developing bodies into a cement block with one another. And when everyone starts running, then there is a lot more potential for an actually serious accident. Okay. So again, it's just not a natural way to raise children in that setting. And again, I know there are reasons for why we do that and all this. I'm not slamming them. I'm just saying that's why teachers are trying to minimize movement, is because movement causes accidents. Whether or not kids are learning to control themselves, yes, but whether or not they're being foolish, if they're just moving a lot, there's going to be an accident just because of the fact that when you're moving, accidents happen. Number two, we don't want movement because, it's distracting for students who are trying to learn. Okay. Now, I don't think classroom instruction is the most effective form of instruction. Again, I think that happens on a one-on-one setting through modeling and imitation between a caregiver and a child. But if we're going to do it the school way, then another reason teachers don't want that is because of the distraction component. You got kids rolling around on the floor. The kid who's actually trying to learn something is not going to be as easily able to get something out of the lesson. Okay. What else? Why else do we try to minimize movement at school? Usually, a lot of teachers' time is being wasted on behavior management, and a lot of it is not going into instruction because of the things that we're expected to deal with. Again, things that we wouldn't have to deal with if, there were alternate forms of education, or the parents had chosen an alternate form of education. So I don't know. There's just a couple things there that I thought were interesting, but let's continue to see what he says.
Oftentimes we're saying, well, we need childcare for our kids so that parents can go off to work. And so they are not only being emotionally separated way too young from their moms
Correct.
and dads,
Correct.
but then they end up in circle time and in these sort of situations in which attention and not being rambunctious, not being sort of just naturally gregarious or physical, these things are expected of children that are way too young for them, but that they're needed by kind of the way we are educating kids.
Yeah. Do you know how to get a child to listen to you? And this is something that I've learned early in teaching. Like you can tell a child to do something. You can repeat it 1,000 times. You can enforce boundaries when they don't listen to you. And all those things kind of work to some degree, like repetition, routine, practice, consistency. Those are things that are important when you're teaching children to do things. But you know what will really make it easy for a child to learn something is if you build a bond with them doing something that they're designed to do at, a critical developmental stage of their life, and you teach them something in that moment, man, they're going to do anything for you. They will literally jump over the moon in order to make you happy if you build that bond with them. Okay. So this is a very effective way of instruction. You just literally do things with children that they love doing. You do things with children that they come alive when they do. Okay. And in doing that, you build a bond with them that makes them want and enables them to do incredibly difficult, hard things that they're going to have to learn later in life. This is a highly effective form of instruction, and it's something that, again, parents have the best opportunity to do because they have more of a bond with their child than anybody. Okay? Yes, parents and teachers and students have a bond. Teachers and the kids we have at school have a bond. Okay? It's not as strong as the parent-child bond. At least in most cases where parenting is done right, it's not as strong. Okay, so you have a golden opportunity here as parents to impart wisdom to students, not through some crazy instructional method, some groundbreaking, instructional method that you only learn by going to college for 4 years. No, it's very, very simple. Okay, you just build a bond with a student. And once you have that bond built, they will literally do anything for you, okay? It enables them to learn and do these hard things that you're asking of them so that they can be well-rounded adults. Highly, highly effective form of instruction. That's what I would do all the time if, again, I had the opportunity to be around students for more than 40 minutes a week. And that's something that you guys have as parents. It's an opportunity that you have with your children and that I'm going to have one day starting in May with my son or daughter, is to build a bond because I have more time with this student than anyone, with this child than anyone, I should say, with this little human being than anybody else. Okay, so I have a opportunity that nobody else has. I think just we really, really need to understand.
Another comment that got a lot of attention is, wow, I love this perspective, especially because I think we talk a lot about how boys need their dads more at certain points in their lives, but with little boys, the one they really need is their mother. And I live this every day with my boys. I'm their whole world right now. This makes so much sense to me. Thanks for the reminder to be present with them and attentive to those needs. Yes, we do. We talk a ton here at Family Teams about the importance of fathers in the lives of boys, but it's important to break that down developmentally. In these really early stages, they need their mother. Their mother is sort of, as Erica Komisar kind of points out, if you kind of listen to a lot of what she writes about this, they're almost an extension of like the child is almost an extension. The mother is nervous system is almost like in that child, and they feel that bond, and breaking that bond through putting them in lengthy daycare at a very young age is really, really hard on kids, but especially boys. And so something can actually break inside of them in ways that can really hurt them over the long term, their emotional development, their mental development. And so
I'm not saying this kind of thing to scare you, like, don't put your kid in school. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, you've got to make a conscious effort here to build a bond with your child in a world where the cultural downstream is taking you towards separation from your child, like at an early age, at a premature age. Okay. And so I don't know, you've got to kind of swim against the current, because we've set things up in a world today where the mom goes off to work 8 hours a day by herself. The dad goes off to work 8 hours a day by himself. The kids go off to work 8 hours a day by themselves as early as 5 years old. Nobody on the family team is spending time together. Nobody on the family team is spending time building that bond that again makes learning possible and demands and challenges possible. Because again, what I see is people putting demands on children who have no connection with those children. First step is connection. Okay, first step is always connection. You try to put a demand on a relationship that can't hold that demand, and you're going to get a rebellion, or you're going to get a defiance, or you're going to get a being ignored, or you're going to get children just literally not having the motivation to do what you're asking because you haven't built that bond. And again, I'm not saying that teachers should necessarily, like, they're just doing a bad job at this because they don't have enough time. Again, the only time they have enough time is during that 1 year of school, and then they reset. We hit the reset button, and they get new kids, and then they have to start over building a new bond in order to place a demand on the relationship and say, hey, I need you to do this hard thing. I need you to pass this math exam. I need you to pass this English exam. Okay. And that bond cannot sustain the pressure, the demand that is being asked of it. We need to spend more time on the bond so that when you place a demand on the bond, I saw this really great illustration by Danny Silk, who I've talked about many, many times before. And he couples come into his office and they say, we have a communication problem. And he's like, no, you don't have a communication problem. You have a connection problem. Okay. And he has them stand up and he hands them a tissue. Okay. He hands one of the spouses a tissue and he says, hold this tissue and don't let go. Okay. This is the demand that you're placing on your partner. Don't let go of this demand. Don't let go of this tissue. Then he says, all right, now I want you, he turns to the other partner. He says, I want you to grab that tissue as well. Okay. And this represents your connection, right? The tissue is your connection. And then he says, now he says to one spouse, I want you to pull on this tissue. That's the demand. Okay. So the spouse pulls on the tissue. Neither one of them let go because they were both instructed not to. And what happens? The tissue rips in half and neither one of the partners gets moved. Okay. Because their connection was fragile. The communication was there. The tug was there. The indication that I want you to do something was there. The communication was not the problem. The communication was effective. The communication was not the problem. The problem was the fragile connection that existed between those two parties. And this is exactly where we run into problems with parenting and getting kids to do what they need to do, is we don't have a sufficient connection with them to place a heavy demand on it, okay, on the relationship. He does the same example again, but this time he uses like a leather belt. So he has one of the, and you can see where this is going. He has one partner hold one side of the belt. He has one partner hold the other side of the belt. And he says, okay, now pull. And they pull on the belt. And of course, this time their spouse comes closer to them. And that kind of symbolizes what happens in a relationship when you have a strong connection. You actually have influence. You actually have pull with the other person. Okay. And that's just a beautiful thing that we need to understand more, because it seems to me like we're living in a world where we're placing demands on relationships that have not been infrastructured to hold those demands. And this is very, very true in education. Okay. And I'm not saying that, like, I'm all about, again, personal responsibility. I'm not trying to bail these kids out by saying like it's not their fault that they're in rebellion and they're being defiant and they're throwing themselves on the floor and all this. Would we ask them to, behave in the lunchroom and treat people kindly, use kind words, have self-control when they're around people? It's not that. That is something they need to work on. The children are heathens, and like, you're training them. Like, that's just how parenting goes. But what I'm saying is we're going about it in the wrong order. Instead of building a connection, we're placing a demand on a relationship that cannot sustain that demand. So let's continue to see what Jeremy says here.
We have really underemphasized how much young boys need their mother in this really early stage in order to maximize freedom for women. And I think it's really important that we now take a step back and just say, look, we got to be objective about this. What is actually happening in the lives of these young boys, and that they do need their mother, and that we need to prize and really lift up the importance that mothers play in the lives of young boys and young girls, but especially to understand the level of fragility that young boys have at this stage. Okay, last one. Every mom, this must be somebody from England, who has a son finds out pretty quickly they are more fragile in a sense. It's not a bad thing. They need cuddles. Yes. Thank you. And yes, they need their mom. And I think this is such an important conversation we need to have. We need to take a step back and really understand what's happening with boys and girls developmentally.
That's the end of his video. Something I just want to kind of highlight for you going out there. A couple of themes from his video were emotional fragility that is needed developmentally by boys at a young age, particularly from their mother. And this is increasingly, there's more strain being put on these emotionally fragile children because we are removing that mother, their primary caregiver, from them for, 7.5, 8 hours a day. That's just the average. That's not what always is done, but that's the average of what is done. And we're kind of placing demands on them in these institutions that are housing them for 7.5, 8 hours a day that are too difficult for the relationship to handle because we've not built the bond with the person we're trying to influence. Okay. You got to build bonds. I'm probably going to make it somehow into the title of this episode, but like for me, parenting and even just working, and again, I've worked with thousands of kids. And what I've noticed is teaching is always more effective when there is a bond built. Okay. It's always more effective when there is a relationship that is reinforced over time through spending time with one another and interacting with one another, doing things that the children enjoy. Again, like if you want my opinion of how to make public education better, and again, you can't fix public education. There's always going to be a problem because again, it's kind of like the parents. Again, the parents are who's designed to raise children like that. So when you try to have people who are not parents raise children, it's just not going to work as well. But what would make my classroom instruction, way more effective, way more efficient, is if I actually had the opportunity and the time to build a bond with my students before I start placing demands on them. So before I teach them to use please and thank you, before I teach them manners, before I teach them respect, before I teach them responsible decision-making, social awareness, self-awareness, self-control, before I teach them any of those things, I have to have a connection with them, okay? Otherwise, it's very, very difficult for the relationship to even handle the demands that I'm going to put on that relationship. Like, because the kids are going to want to, say nasty things to somebody that makes them mad. That's just that's just humanity's natural inclination. You want revenge, you want to get back at somebody who does something you don't like. If I'm going to teach them not to do that and to treat people the way that we want to be treated, to live by the golden rule, and I'm going to ask them to do something that is very, very definitionally against their nature, that's a pretty heavy demand that I'm putting on that relationship. That's a pretty intense way that I'm trying to influence this party. So if I'm going to influence this kid in that way, I've got to have a pretty strong relationship in order for that tissue not to tear. Does that make sense? I hope it does. These are just some of my, teaching thoughts. If you've ever wondered what it's like to be a public school teacher, what it's like is like, basically picture 650 students, and my connection with them all is like paper thin. And I am pulling on that paper and trying to get them up a 10,000 foot mountain range to the top without that tissue, that paper thin, connection tearing in half and them just falling down, the cliff. Like that's what teaching is like. What it would be, and again, why are the tissues so thin? Why are the connections so fragile? Why are the bonds so shallow? And the answer is, I do not have sufficient time in my life to bond with 650 individual and distinct children. That's not how it was supposed to be. Each of these children is supposed to have two parents, okay? And that's why families are not, that's why nuclear families are not, 30 members, 40 members, 100 members. It wouldn't be effective, okay? It wouldn't be effective parenting if you were to biologically be capable of having 100 children, which by the way, God made it not that way for a reason. There is no way you would be able to bond with all these people. You simply don't have time in your life to do that. And we're kind of expecting that of public school teachers. We're kind of like saying, all right, we're going to give you, 7 hours a day or whatever. Bond with 650 students to the extent that you can place a demand on the relationship and get them to make good choices, which are against their nature. And you have like 10 months to do it. It's like, what? It just doesn't work. Oh, and by the way, you'll get new students next year. Like all these are gone. They're moving away. Like I'm an activity teacher right now, so I get those 650 kids, all of them, every week for 40 minutes, which is not a lot of time. But their homeroom teachers, their main instructional teachers, have them in their classroom for 8 hours a day. Well, more like 5. Okay, more like 5 hours a day. of actual time with their students actually bonding with each other. Okay. So still not a lot, still not as much as parents have the potential to have. Again, like especially early developmental years, you can have all the time that you want with your kid. If you have one person who is providing for the family and one person, again, who is able to look after the home and bond with the children. That's why one reason that the kind of the breadwinner, homemaker, family model is pretty effective is because you have somebody to actually bond, and somebody to actually give the children all they need. And of course, this changes, as kids get older, they need their dad more to bond with them. And I totally understand that. But like, I don't know, you can't solve through government intervention what the family was designed to do from the beginning. Okay, you can't just absolve yourself as personal responsibility. I've said that like a million times. That's just my parenting philosophy. That's what my parenting philosophy is going to be. And let me know what you guys thought of this episode and what your kind of parenting philosophy is, as well as what you thought of Jeremy Pryor's thoughts in this episode. And what Erica Komisar said about boys being emotionally fragile and potentially separating boys and girls at early ages so that we can teach them differently. Again, I don't think that will fix the problem, again, because we're separating them from their primary caregivers, at the age of 5. So there's going to be emotional fragility issues that arise from that no matter what, and as well as other issues. I'm not saying that's the only issue, but that's definitely one. So let me know what you thought of this episode, everything in it. Again, tell me what you thought of Erica Komisar. Tell me what you thought of Jeremy Pryor. Tell me what you thought of what I said. As a public school educator, I would love to hear what you think. It would make this a conversation instead of a monologue, and it would make this podcasting system two-way. Do it through the YouTube comments or by reaching out on social media and messaging the podcast. Would love to hear from you there. It would make me feel super connected to you guys as audience members. So without further ado, thank you so much for listening today. I hope you have a good Thanksgiving. This is coming out around Thanksgiving. Think of something today, drop something in the comments that you're thankful for, okay? Something that you are blessed to have, something that basically gets your mind thinking about whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, whatever is excellent, whatever is praiseworthy, for we are to think about such things, as Philippians says. So just try to list some things, in the comments or, wherever you can list them that would basically remind you of the good things that you've been given. So thank you guys so much for listening today, and I will talk to you all next time.